Guys, how's it going? Welcome to the Mina channel. Today we have another discussion video here regarding something that you guys been actually asking me so much to talk about, and that is Persona 1 and 2. Now, this is not the first time I make Persona 1 and 2 videos. I actually have a ton of Persona 1 and 2 videos in the channel. It's just that I have speak about it sporadically because there is just not a whole lot going on right now with Persona 1 and 2, and that's pretty much what we're going to talk about. So we recently have the release of Persona 4 Golden on the PC, and we also recently just yesterday actually talked about the possibility of more ports coming in based on some rumors and news and that kind of stuff. So what's up with Persona 1 and 2? What's going on with the fact that either one refuses them to acknowledge that they even exist, and two, they haven't even really bothered to talk about them in any kind of way. Even when you go into their Twitter, which they usually celebrate like the birthday anniversary of some character and everything, Persona 1 and 2, you never hear anything about their birthdays, which is kind of weird because, you know, they're happy and everything. It's just not really something that happens often at all. In fact, the only time that we actually seen them acknowledge Persona 1 and 2 is when it comes to DLC on Persona 5 or Persona 5 Royal. We had some DLC with Shin Megami Tensei as well as Persona 1 and 2. So that's really the limit of how much we have heard of, how much we have seen and everything. So what's going on with that? What can we expect from that? Are we gonna get any ports or anything like that? My original thought on this one was no, we're probably not gonna get ports on this. But upon thinking about it and revisiting just a couple different stuff, I think that maybe we may get a Persona 1 and 2 port at some point. A remake is very unlikely to happen for different reasons that I'll talk about in a second, although I particularly think that those games desperately need a remake, desperately need something to kind of revitalize the brand in that sense. Persona 1 and 2 are not bad games at all. Let's start with this. Persona 1 has obviously the establishment of what the series is about, which does establishes a lot of characters, which such as Igor, which is a long-standing character in the series, as well as some other characters you may not be very familiar with. For spoiler reasons, I won't go into detail about it. However, Persona 2 is, we'll say, almost like a timeless classic with the story. I'll say if I were to rank story-wise just Persona games in story, I think Persona 2 is probably either number 1 or 2. The story alone. The story is really interesting. It has really weird concepts as far as like time, and they have this thing going on with rumors, which is kind of like a big deal within the story. And all of those mechanics and all of the storytelling parts are superb, and it's something that we actually haven't really been able to replicate. I think the closest to me is Persona 3 as far as like story bits and everything. It's just everything else is just in a very different spectrum as far as what you can see. But Persona 2 particularly is a very Shin Megami Tensei Persona story, which is very different from what we now see as far as the Neo Sona games and everything. So it does bring the question, why doesn't Atlus want to touch these games? These games need to be touched and it needs to bring back. Honestly, a remake will make the most sense to players, especially new fans of the series, like Persona 5 players or Persona 4 players, which is they're just literally starting into it, because they want to see the new graphics and everything like that. The issue is the game has a lot more to it than just graphics. The games at its core have a very different gameplay style when it comes to the dungeon crawling aspect, whether it comes to the actual gameplay of the fighting and the combat mechanics, which uses a completely different setup and everything. Things like the demon fusion or the persona fusion work completely different. The way that they handle character development and character interaction is different as well. There's no social links or anything like that. So the games are archaically completely different. They work in two different sides. Persona, although they own the name, Persona 1 and 2 are really much more closer to Shin Megami Tensei games than they are to actually Persona, and which is a really interesting thing how much they were able to change when they switched directors, because it does point out that having a different creative can make a different game. It can make or break a brand, really, and they really took a gamble as far as getting a new director into the series and just kind of handle the third game in the series, which is a big deal, right? And luckily for us, for many people, they were able to handle it in a different direction, and direction really worked out well. But that doesn't mean that these games need to stay where they are. Japan has a really weird tradition when it comes to remakes and remasters, which is usually they usually want to have the original person that handled the team work on that particular project. I don't think that it's gonna be possible for Persona 1 and 2 if they were to make a remake, and I don't think they're really in the business of revisiting that franchise or that part of the franchise anymore. A remaster or a port will make more sense because one, it is very effortlessly on Atlus's part when it comes to actual things. You know, they can just put it out there. It's not a lot of, it's hard work, but it's not as hard. Obviously we see it with Persona 4, they're charging $20 for it, so I'm sure it wasn't really hard for them to actually port the game to PC, which is all that they need to do. That being said, Persona 1 and 2 also sit on a different thing, especially Persona 2, Innocent Sin, and Eternal Punishment, because they sit on a really interesting spot, because both of those games, or particularly one of them, have some pretty controversial things that you may or may not have heard. I don't want to say it for spoilers, but at its time and even now it was pretty controversial with some of the aspects that they did with characters, with a certain character in the story that shows up. And I don't know if 21st century West audience is ready to deal with what happens in Persona 2 because of these things. I don't know what the reaction of the mass media will be like. Does that make sense to you? I don't know if without saying too much, that will be sort of things, and maybe that's something that Atlus is not willing to go through and everything, particularly the fact that when Persona 1 and 2 came out to the PSP, Persona 1 came out completely, but Persona 2, they only released the second part of it. They actually didn't release the other part of the game. So it does leave you wonder that they, even back then, they weren't really wanting to deal with a lot of this stuff and like that. And of course, this time around, you can see that they clearly probably don't want to deal with that again. The other thing is, Persona 1 particularly went through a hell of a translation process, which really completely changed the way the game. Persona Revelations, as you know in the United States, and Persona 1, as is known in Japan, is two completely different versions of the game. In fact, one of the races of the characters was changed. The names were changed, a lot of different changes, and while this was kept intact now in the Japanese Persona portable release, which was also released in the West, I don't know if again Japan Atlus wants to deal with the whole fiasco that happened back then. And again, that's some things that they have to kind of deal with through, because again, they have to deal with licensing and translations and things in the West. So I don't know how much of it they're really willing to touch, because the reason why Persona 4 Golden came out so fast in PC is because one, a translation was done, everything was pretty much done. There was not a whole lot that they had to do in terms of westernizing this game or getting it in the West. In fact, this game was released at the same time as in Japan. This is the second game we ever had that happen, ever. And the other one wasn't even like a full Atlus game. It was Atlus and Nintendo. Then whenever they originally released Tokyo Mirage Sessions, that came out in Japan and the West at the same time. That is really because of the push of Nintendo trying to get more JRPGs on the Switch. But this is really a big one for us to actually get a simultaneous release of the West and on Japan at the same time for Persona 4 Golden. This is a big deal in a lot of different senses. I don't really see that ever happening in any other case. So the fact that they were able to do it so fast does imply that it has something to do with the translation team. It has something to do with the way that they wanted to handle things. And as much as I want to, I think that the last few games I want to get are probably going to be Persona 1 and 2. And again, that's just based on everything that I just mentioned before. Do I want one? Yes, I would love one. And in fact, I'm going to make another video here that I'm working on regarding what I would like to see in a Persona 1 and 2 remake, because it will be interesting to talk about. But anyway, that is pretty much in this video here. Just wanted to talk about this because you guys have been literally asking me about this in multiple messages and comments and everything. So I think that it will be a good discussion to do. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this. And if you're new, please consider liking and subscribing. And I'll see you guys next time.